Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Jackie Linder. I am speaking to you from my home in Edmonton, Alberta. I'm a registered psychologist and a clinical traumatologist. I'm also the CEO of the Spiral Phoenix Trauma Institute in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I'm doing a little webinar today to support civilians who are currently assisting survivors of the Fort McMurray fires. There are many evacuees coming to various towns and cities throughout Alberta, and we're doing our best as a community to support them. The protocol that I want to share with you in this little webinar is specifically for civilians who are supporting survivors, possibly by providing them shelter as well as other forms of support. It's called the CASE protocol, C-A-S-E. It is a community-based trauma response protocol, and I adapted it from psychological first aid that was developed by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. The first step in the CASE protocol is comfort. Step 2 is assist. Step 3 is support. And step 4 is empower. These 4 steps are a handy little map for civilians supporting survivors on the front line. This will give people a little step-by-step protocol to help them know when to support different kinds of situations, what best resources they can offer. The first step in any scenario in which there's trauma or disaster is to obviously support the victim. There's many ways we can do this. Comforting them in terms of their physical or emotional well-being is very important. First and foremost, we want to ensure that they are safe. Once their physical safety is assured, then we need to think about what other kinds of creature comforts people need. Most of the people who have left the evacuation centers have left their belongings, or most of their belongings, behind. So simple items are going to make a huge difference in terms of their personal comfort. And that could look like providing them with some clothing, change of clothing, basic toiletries, etc., etc. Making sure that they're in a space where they are feeling as settled as possible given the challenges that they are facing. In terms of other things to think about, once safety is sorted and resolved, we also want to think about soothing emotional distress. Obviously, there are a lot of people in this situation who have lost a lot. They have lost their homes, they have lost furniture, personal property, memorabilia. Some people have lost much loved pets. They have lost their way of being in the world. Some of them may be facing loss of employment because their places of employment have burned to the ground. So soothing distress is going to be very important in terms of helping people ground and settle as much as possible. Fortunately, in terms of soothing distress, we do know in terms of the science of trauma that social support is the #1 most powerful and protective factor in mitigating the effects of trauma. One of the things that of course we're concerned about is not just the immediate loss of property, etc., but the potential psychological and emotional fallout that could occur from a disaster of this magnitude. An important part of supporting people is helping them mitigate their stress response. So just about everybody who has come out of the evacuation zone and everybody who is helping in the evacuation zone, as well as in various towns and cities across Alberta, is going to be very emotionally activated and therefore very physiologically activated. What this means is that stress response is going to be quite high. The term that we use in psychology is fight-flight response. So we're going to see fight-flight activation not just in the survivors, but in the helpers as well. So managing the biological hardware of stress in the human body is a critical aspect in terms of supporting long-term wellness for the evacuees as well as everybody involved in the support chain. So things like low lighting, soft textures like blankets, warm beverages that people can wrap their hands around, access to pets that they can cuddle, deep breathing for people who are extremely anxious can also be very helpful. A little strategy that I like to use personally when I'm feeling extraordinarily stressed is finger tapping. So it means bilateral finger tapping, going left and right with your thumb and your pointy finger going back and forth. Some people find that very grounding. It's quite simple. It's quite mobile. You can use it very easily. There's another very handy little grounding technique called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 for people who are quite anxious. You can invite them to identify 5 things they can smell, 5 things they can touch, 5 things they can hear, and do that little exercise over and over until they get to 1. It takes about 7 minutes, and usually by the time the person has worked their way through the exercise, they're feeling a little bit calmer. So managing the stress response is all about helping the person move in the direction of relaxation as much as they possibly can, given the circumstances that they're facing. So that's step 1, comfort, providing physical and emotional safety. Step 2 is all about practical assistance. So A for assist, offer practical help, problem solving information. So the first point here is covering the basics. And the basics, surprisingly enough, for many people can be as simple as a pack of cigarettes or a cup of coffee. This is not a point in time where we're going to focus on whether or not these are helpful coping strategies. For a lot of people, they really work. So simple little practical gifts. A clean pair of socks can make all the difference. Little things that help people get through the day with a little bit of dignity. That's also critical in terms of stabilizing their mood and allows them to be more resourced and resilient in the face of disaster and trauma. Making lists so that they can knock things off. So one of the really problematic things and scary things about disaster and trauma is everything falls apart. Everything that we know, everything that we expect, everything we've come to believe, everything that we can trust. So it's hard to know how we're going to build a new life post-disaster because there are so many balls in the air. And having this many balls in the air can actually create feelings of anxiety that persist. Anxiety then can lead to sleepless nights can lead to mood deterioration, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a bit of a snowball, and we need to stop that snowball from building. So one of the easiest things to do is make a list of items lost. Make a list of issues that have to be addressed, things that need to be done, because the concrete action of making the list is actually going to help the brain to focus, which will help draw it out of an anxious state. It's going to give the person a sense of purpose, which is very important. And there's also going to be, at the end of this exercise, a very practical list of things to do that people will have the opportunity to act on in the coming days. The next point I want to talk about is sharing information. It's really, really important that the survivors are given ongoing, accurate information in so much as that is possible and appropriate. One of the hardest things when you are a survivor is to be sitting waiting for information that does not arrive. So you're worried about your house, but you don't know if it's standing or not standing. You're worried about your pets, but you don't know if anybody found them. You're worried about your job, but you don't even know if your business is still open or has been destroyed. Things like that can also cause anxiety, which keeps the fight-flight response going, and all of that sets us up for long-term problem symptoms later on. So giving people information is a very important part. It's not just practical, it's an important part of managing their anxiety and their distress and their stress in the face of this kind of disaster. So where appropriate, set up a radio, set up a television, keep the news feed on. Make sure that if you're in a hotel, for example, or if you have people staying in your home, bring in newspapers if that's appropriate so that the information is there for everybody. Step 3 is support. And when we say support, we mean emotionally support. So we've worked through the basics. Safety issues are resolved. We have been practical in terms of problem solving, all very important. A critical step, the third step, is making sure that people have ongoing emotional support. And this is critical. Listening, encouraging, and fostering hope are critical components of a community-based trauma response. First of all, we need to know what is an abnormal versus a normal response to a catastrophe of this magnitude. So grief, anger, rage, frustration, irritability, all of these things are completely appropriate. They're all signs that the physical body has been activated and is in a fight-flight zone, which may take a few days or a few weeks to resolve. That's completely fine. If people are in what appears to be a numb state, a spaced out state, they're behaving as if they don't hear you, they're behaving as if they can't focus, they can't understand. Those are more significant symptoms, and people who are displaying those kinds of symptoms would benefit from connecting with a mental health professional. Knowing that listening is often enough is a key piece. I get asked all the time by people that I train, and I have trained thousands of frontline workers in traumatology. I get asked, what can we do if we're not psychologists and we're not trauma specialists? And I remind them that it's actually not the help from a trauma psychologist that is the most important protective factor against post-traumatic stress disorder. The most important protective factor is social support, and that means the community circling the people in distress and being there for them. So you need to know that just being willing to sit down and listen to somebody who is frightened, angry, upset, frustrated, or grieving is a huge part of the contribution, and over time will help them. There's very clear scientific evidence that shows that emotional disclosure alone, even without any other form of assistance, emotional disclosure can be a healing agent, not just for the mind, but actually also for the physical body. Probably because in the process of disclosing distress, people actually start to calm down a little bit, they start to relax a little bit, and that helps to disengage the fight-flight response, which is what keeps the mental health issues continuing long after the trauma has passed. An important consideration if you're supporting or helping or assisting people who are coming out of a disaster zone is not to jump into the well. So I talk to my students all the time about knowing what end of the rope that you're on. So the metaphor that I use when I'm teaching is that the person that you're seeking to help is in a well of some kind, and they need a rope, and they need to climb out of the well with that rope. Therefore, it is critical that you, who are holding the other end of the rope, is not jumping into the well with them. So if you are a helper, a supporter, a frontline worker who is assisting somebody in distress coming out of this disaster, it is absolutely critical that you are receiving your own emotional support and backup and debriefing, and that you're doing your own grieving so that you can be solid and grounded and present when it's your turn to hold the rope for the person who is in a very distressed state. You cannot have the victim and the helper in the same distressed state of mind at the same time. Both sides can be distressed, and they can be distressed at different times, but not at the same time. Because if they're both distressed at the same time, that means there are actually two people in the well, not just one, and nobody is holding the other end of the rope. So it is quite appropriate if you are feeling full, overwhelmed, fragile, or vulnerable, and you are a helper, it is quite appropriate to say no, take a break, get some respite, fill up again, get resourced before you get back into the helping process. Last but not least, a critical component that is sometimes forgotten in situations like this. Step 4 of the case model is the empowerment of the survivor. So helping survivors resume control. Everything that we know about control within our species suggests that we do best as a species when we feel control of our environment, when we feel control of our lives. One of the terrifying things about trauma and disaster is that it takes that control away from us. And when we're evacuating from a disaster zone and we don't know where we're going to sleep, and we don't have gas in our car, and we don't know how we're going to get any of these things that are going to make sure that we're okay, our sense of control becomes less and less. There's very clear scientific data that show the less in control we feel of the world around us, the worse psychological symptoms we experience, the more emotional distress. So ensuring that survivors have opportunities to feel in control at every appropriate moment. And that can look like, if they're actually staying in an evac center, they have an opportunity to determine where they are going to stay in the physical space. They need to be able to make choices, because in making choices, it gives them a greater sense of control over the situation, and that's critical to their mental wellness. We also need to be harnessing survivors' strengths. Lots and lots and lots of people have something to offer. So the fact that they have fled the fire zone, the fact that they have been in distress driving away from Fort McMurray, the fact that they are very worried about their property and their jobs and possible lost pets and other family members, does not mean they don't have strengths that will benefit the situation. So it is very important to ascertain, based on the survivors that are near you, that you are working with, that you are helping, it is very important to ascertain what strengths they can bring to bear. It is their community also, it is their experience also. They must be allowed to contribute to the solution. Finally, it is absolutely critical that survivors be permitted to engage in constructive action. One of the most difficult things about survivors, about traumas of this magnitude and disasters of this magnitude, is sitting around feeling helpless. Feeling helpless can lead to a whole bunch of very concerning mental health issues, including depression as well as anxiety, among other things. And so being able to constructively act in a positive way, and that might mean being assigned tasks, being assigned jobs, setting up a phone tree, helping with the children, ensuring that school assignments, lessons, and homework are continuing despite the disaster. All of these things are critical. It gives people something to do. It helps the time pass. It gives them a sense of purpose and focus, and it allows them to be part of the solution, not just victims of the problem. Hopefully, this very small little map will help you. Those of you who are on the front lines of this disaster, one of the major disasters in our province, and who are doing everything that you can, I want you to know, as a trauma specialist, that those of you who are on the front lines have a lot to offer in terms of mental wellness in the situation. It's not just physical assistance and basic respite that you're offering. You have an opportunity to help prevent significant psychological fallout by supporting and resourcing the survivors coming out of this situation. I wish you all Godspeed. My thoughts are with you. My prayers are with you. One way or another, as a community, I truly believe we're going to get this thing done. Thank you.